Well, last week we began an 8-week series looking at the core values of Community of Joy. It's good to touch base with those every once in a while because core values are guiding principles that dictate our behavior, we hope. We hope that they're more than words on a wall or words on a page or words on a website. We hope that they're principles that influence the way we live, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we are the church. And so here at Community of Joy, we have 8 core values, and they can come in any order, except the first one is always first, and we talked about the first one last week. And the first one is always Jesus. That is where we start. If we don't start there, we've got problems. So as a church, our first core value is always Jesus, because we want to reflect Jesus as a church. We want all that we do and all that we say and all that we are to be about Jesus. And so if you missed last week's sermon, you can find it recorded on our website. There's a media page, and there's sermon links there to a YouTube, and you can listen to it there. We would encourage you to do that. Each of our 8 core values are 2 words, except one of them is 3 words, because it didn't make sense to make it 2 words. And I did that so that we would remember them, because if they're going to take root in our being and our way of life, we have to know what they are. And so if they're a sentence long or a paragraph long, who's going to remember that? But you can remember always Jesus. And our second, the core value we're looking at today, it's not our second core value. I could have chose any one of them, but I chose this one because we were in shelter mode last week, and it really fits with what we do as we are a homeless men's shelter. And it's called Open Arms. We believe here at Community of Joy that Jesus had open arms, and so should we. Luke tells us in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 15, he begins this introduction of 3 stories or 3 parables that Jesus tells, and he says this in introducing them. He says, tax collectors and notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus to teach. And this made the Pharisees and the religious leaders angry that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Now, Jesus couldn't stop the quote-unquote sinful people, notorious sinners, from coming to him to listen to him teach, and that angered the religious leaders a little bit, but what really pushed them over the edge, what really angered them, was that he was eating with them. Now, who do you eat with? When you sit down at the table and you eat with somebody, it's an intimate thing. I mean, you eat with people that you know and like, right? I mean, we don't spend time sitting at the table with people that we don't like, people that we despise. And so Jesus, in sitting down at the table with these notorious sinners, these tax collectors, and these people who, that society, much like our society, judges people. And when we don't deem people worthy of love and a place in the kingdom of God, we point fingers, we push them down, we push them to the margins. And so that's what that society had done. They had deemed these people notorious sinners and tax collectors. They weren't the good, upstanding citizens. And here is Jesus, a rabbi, eating with these people. It was scandalous in their eyes. And so Jesus, the masterful teacher, I love the way Jesus conducts himself. He told a story. He told 3 stories to respond to the religious leaders and Pharisees of his day and the perspective that they held about what he was doing. So he tells this story about a father who has 2 sons. It's a very familiar story. We call it the story of the parable of the prodigal son. And you've heard me say this 100 times probably whenever I talk about it. It's really wrong of us to call it the parable of the prodigal son, because it is a story about a son who is wayward and who is prodigal and who goes off. But it's also about a story about a running father, a loving father. It's also a story about a disgruntled older brother. And we can be any of those people in this story. Jesus is a masterful teacher, and he's telling this story. It's not a true story. It's a story that's intended to put the Pharisees and religious leaders in their place, to teach them about the kingdom of God and the love that God has for humankind. All people. Not just people that we deem as worthy of God's love, but all people, the people that we point to and point at and push down and push to the sides and the margins of life. All people. This story is intended to teach an important point. So Jesus says there's a father who has two sons, and the younger son comes to the father and slaps his dad in the face 3 times. Now that's not what Jesus said, but that's what Jesus said. Jesus said the younger son came to the father and said, "Dad, give me my share of the inheritance." And that's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face because what the son is saying to the dad, the time that the inheritance transitions from the father to the son is after the father dies. And so the son is saying to the father, "I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance." That's a slap in the face. We don't understand that in our culture because it's not odd for people to come to their parents and say, "Hey, I need some help. I need some money. I need some resources." But in this culture, in that culture, Jesus, the younger son, is coming to the father in Jesus' story, and he's saying, "Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me all that's mine. Give me half of your inheritance, your estate." And then the second slap in the face is when the son goes off to a distant land, Jesus says. You see, sons in that day were expected to take care of their aging parents. We don't know how old this father is, and we don't know whether he's aging or whether he's young. I mean, he's old enough to have sons, but that could be 13, 14. I mean, who knows how old he is? But the point is that the son leaves the father, takes his money and runs and goes to a far off distant land where he's shirking his responsibility as a son to the father. And the third slap in the face for the Jews of that day, it was taboo to have anything to do with pigs. And here this son, when he lost all of his inheritance, he's found feeding pigs. That's a slap in the face to any good Jew. And then, to make it even worse, Jesus says he was so hungry, he was willing to eat what he was feeding the pigs. This son, this younger son, was a disgrace to his father. He had hurt his dad very badly. He had disappointed his father greatly. Jesus is painting this picture of a son who has really laid it on and damaged that relationship with his dad, or so we would assume. I mean, if I slap my dad in the face 3 times, I can expect that relationship with my dad would be strained at minimum. Actually, if I slapped my dad in the face 1 time, I'd get slapped back pretty hard. I know that. But Jesus is painting this picture of this awful son, this disrespectful son, this son who has disappointed his dad greatly. A lost cause, some might say. He did things a son isn't supposed to do. And yet after his money runs out, the son has time to reflect on his actions and the love that his father had for him. He decides to return home to apologize to his father and to seek his father's forgiveness and to ask his father to help him, to let him be back in the household, but as a servant, not as a son. And this story hinges on verse 20. And we miss it so often. Any of you who have heard me preach on this story before, you know that I love verse 20, that it is just the most beautiful verse in this whole passage in this whole story that Jesus says. Listen to verse 20. Jesus says, "So the younger son returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him." Now that is a beautiful picture. While he was a long way off, while the younger son was a long way off, before any words were exchanged, before any apology was issued, before any forgiveness was asked for, the father saw the son coming and ran to meet him. Now, the people that heard this story in that day would know that that is not a normal response of a father who has been slapped in his face 3 times. First off, it communicates that the father was looking for the son. I mean, how in the world did he see him when he was a long way off unless he was standing there? And in my mind, I picture him standing at the crest of the hill, looking off in the horizon. And when he notices the walk of his son, because he can't tell a long way off, they probably didn't have binoculars then. And so he had to recognize his son somehow. And as soon as he recognized that it was his son, he went running to him. Now, the picture that we normally paint here of a reconciliation is the one who was offended waits for the one who offends to come back. But that's not the picture Jesus is painting. Yes, he did take the first step, but the father who was offended runs to the offender. It's not daddy sitting there with arms wide open waiting for the son to make it all the way back. And he's not waiting on the son to say, "Hey, I screwed up. I disrespected you." He's not waiting on that. The father goes off running as soon as he recognizes his son. And he's filled, Jesus tells us that the father is filled with love and compassion. He's not standing there with arms crossed waiting on this son to come back and grovel. He's filled with love and compassion for his son until he runs to him. The other thing that we don't understand about this culture is that for a man of any repute to run with robe flapping in the wind, it wasn't cool. Especially not a respected elder or father to go running. It just isn't cool. It would be shocking to the people who heard this story that Jesus was telling, that this father was running in the first place, and even more shocking that he was running to his son who had disrespected him and dishonored him. Especially with money. Yeah. It's huge. But it's a beautiful piece of this story, and I don't want us to miss it. While he was still a long way off, the father saw his son and ran to him. That meant that the father had to be waiting, had to be looking, had to be hoping against hope that someday his son would return to him. The running father, filled with love and compassion for one who had hurt him badly and disappointed him greatly. Note that the father saw the son and ran to him all before any words were exchanged. I mean, that's huge. He didn't know, the father didn't know what the son was going to say. It had nothing to do with the son. The only thing it had to do with is that the son decided that it was time to go home. And he turned around from where he was, which is the first step of repentance, to turn around from where we are and take steps toward God. So that son took that first step, and then the father, before he knew what the son was going to say, ran to meet him because he loved him and he had compassion for him. Now, in this story, we might be that son. Surely we have disappointed God. Surely we have hurt God. Surely we have gone to a distant country and squandered all that God has given us. All that we have, God has given us. It's been a gift from God to us. It's our inheritance. And surely we have not done what God has wanted us to do from time to time. This is a beautiful picture of God, brothers and sisters. In spite of all the disappointment we've heaped on God, God comes running to us the moment we take that first step back toward God, the moment we repent, the moment we turn away from where we were and turn toward God, which is the definition of repentance. The moment we do that, God comes running to us filled with love and compassion, with arms open wide, open arms. That's our second core value here at Community of Joy. Open arms. Open arms of welcome, open arms of love, open arms of compassion, open arms of forgiveness, open arms of grace, open arms of mercy, open arms of non-judgmentalism. The Father's not crossing his arms and saying, "Oh, son, you took half of what I had, and now you don't have it." He doesn't even know that. All he knows is his son went off to a distant country with half of his resources, and now he's coming back. And he knows he has love and compassion for that son. In the story, the Father is God. Jesus tells this story in response to the religious leaders who are criticizing him for spending time with tax collectors and notorious sinners. Jesus in this story is teaching us an important characteristic of God. God has open arms of welcome, of love, of compassion, of grace, of mercy, of forgiveness, of non-judging us. For all of us, even those of us who have disappointed God and hurt him badly, God longs for us to be in relationship with him. That's what Jesus is teaching in this story. This story teaches, and you've heard me say it 100 times if you've been here ever before, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, you are never outside the reach of God's love. This story teaches that. Jesus is being intentional in what he's teaching here. He's responding to his critics, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, who are saying he's hanging out with the people he shouldn't be hanging out with. They're offended by it. And Jesus is saying, no, wait. You don't understand. In God's kingdom, you're never outside the reach of his love, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been. The Father looks, he waits, he runs, after he recognizes, and all of this is while he was still far off. He knew in his heart of hearts it was his son. This is a story about a father, about God, who waits for us to come all the way, who waits for us to come to him. But he doesn't wait for us to come to him groveling. He just waits for us to turn around and take that first step toward God. And then he runs to meet us with open arms. Here at Community of Joy, brothers and sisters, God has open arms, and we want to have open arms. It's a core value. It's a behavior that we want to live. Now, change the picture, Tracy. During our first week at the shelter, we have just completed 2 weeks as a community emergency shelter project. It floats around from church to church. Normally, we host 20 guests here in this facility, but we had 38 guests. We had more than that. Actually, probably had about 45 different people in the 2-week period. And we do it as a way to welcome and love on people that our society has pushed to the edges and the margins, who have said that our society has said don't really matter, they don't value. We do it as a way to show this open arm principle. So we serve supper, and we serve a feast, and we try to serve good food, and we try to not have it be half-eaten hamburgers. And so we work really hard at that. The first week of our shelter, we had a young man, Travis, who came to us. He had been staying at another local shelter, the Christian shelter, and he came to us and he said to me, my time has run up at the Christian shelter. They allow you there for 30 days. He said, my time's run up and I have to be out. He said, "Can I stay here?" I said, "Absolutely. Come on in. We'll give you a bunk and we'll put you up. I'm glad you're here." And then he said to me, he said, "I need to go over to the Christian shelter and get my things. I have 2 bags of clothes that I need to get and come back." And I said, "Well, whoa, wait a minute. You can't leave once you check in. So here, I'll take you." And so I told Walter that I was taking him. And when I left, Walter said, "Ask Sister Mary what the story is." And so I took Travis over there. It's a couple blocks away. He was happy for the ride. I went in while he was getting his stuff. I said to Sister Mary, I said, "He's coming to our shelter." He said this was his last day here because his time had run out. She said, "Oh, no." She said it was his last day here because he tested positive for drugs in his urine. Periodically, we do a urine test, and we always give them the opportunity to confess to us that it might be dirty. And so we asked him before if his urine test would be dirty, and he said no, he hadn't done any drugs, and it came back dirty, and so he has to get out. And so when we rode back to the shelter, I said to Travis, while you were getting your bags, I asked Sister Mary what the deal was. And she told me what the deal was. She told me you tested dirty in your urine for drugs. And I said, "You know what? You're welcome at our shelter. We won't do a urine test on you." I said, we do reserve the right to look through your bags when you come in, and we don't want to find drugs on you in the shelter. But what you do during the daytime is entirely up to you. We can't tell you, and we won't tell you what you can do and can't do during the day. That's on you. You're here. We're here to open our hearts and show you God's love in a tangible way. And you're welcome in this shelter. And if you come in high or drunk, we're going to just simply ask you to go to your bunk and lay down and not cause a problem. As long as you can do that, you're welcome here. If you start getting out of hand and causing problem with other guests or our staff, then we might have to ask you to leave. But as long as you abide by those few rules, you're welcome here. You see, we do the shelter as a demonstration of God's open arms. We meet these brothers right where they are. And I hope they feel the genuine love that we have for them. I hope they feel the warm embrace and the love and the open arms that we have. This last week, I got to see the open arms of God demonstrated to one of our guests in a huge way. A young 21-year-old came to us from Baltimore. He had been here in the area for about 3 months. And he had been serving in jail since he was 19 for a felony. He has a felony against him. And he'd come to live with some supposed family members. And after 3 months of being unable to find a job, they told him that he would have to get out because they couldn't afford to keep him around without him contributing to the household. And so he came to the shelter. And when I met him on his first night there, and he was very, very scared. And he told me his situation, told me his journey, told me about the felony charge. And I couldn't understand the fear that he had because, he had just come out of prison. And I'm like, dude, that's got to be harder than being here. And he was explaining to me that the fear that he had, and he kept saying, "I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can make it here." And it was this fear of not knowing what the future held for him and not knowing what to do during the day and not knowing the area and not knowing where to go and just all that unknown. He said, in prison, I knew what my day was going to be like. I knew what they were going to make me do. I knew, I knew my limitations. I knew I wasn't going to be in any foreign territory. And he said, it's very, very, very different. And I said to him, I'm sad that our system is designed, and it is designed. Our system is designed to keep people down. Our system is not designed to encourage people. This young man has served his time. He's on parole until 2019, but he served his time. And he's come here from Baltimore to Salisbury because he thought it would be a new start for him, and he wants to have a new start. He wants to write a new story, and I could sense that in him. And so I got to watch, I went home and I posted this posting on Facebook because I wanted to try to put a face on who who some of our homeless brothers in our community are, not the typical face that we think of and that we push down and push away. People who are normal, who have expectations and dreams and hopes and desires, just like we have. Not always the drug addict or the mental health person who has mental health issues, or the people who have addiction problems with alcohol. Some of these brothers just need a little bit of encouragement, and this young man was just one of those people. And so I put this post on Facebook, and immediately I had a Facebook friend who's a landscaper in the area contact me in private message and said, "Martin, I would like to meet this guy. I need some employees and I'd like to give him a chance." And so I met with Joe, my friend Joe, and he brought a friend, Joey. And Joe has a landscaping business, and Joey worked for Joe for a number of years and is just now in a fledgling company as a mason. He's a master mason. And he said, "I want to meet with this young man, and between the two of us, we would like to hire him. We would like to, if it goes well in the interview, we'd like to hire him." So on Tuesday, I believe it was, I made reservation for a community room downstairs in the library. We went down, Joe and Joey and my young man friend. We went downstairs, and they asked some pretty straightforward questions, and he had some pretty straightforward answers. And turns out that Joey is on parole right now, has a record, and they came out after that meeting and said they wanted to hire my friend, and he would start the next day. In the process, my friend Joe said, "What about a phone?" And the 21-year-old friend said, "I have a phone. It doesn't have any minutes on it, but I have one." And he showed it to him. And so Joe said, "Well, we can't have that. We got to have you have a phone." So he reached in his pocket and got $100 and gave it to me and said, "Martin, when you come back here, would you take him to the place where he got his phone from and get him minutes on his phone?" Well, when we went, I had a meeting at Pinehurst with Bob. We mentor. It was Wednesday. It wasn't Tuesday. It was Wednesday. So we mentored on Wednesday at Pinehurst. And when I got done, I went back and I picked up my friend at the library and I took him to the place where, and you should have seen his face. I'll never forget his face when that $100 came out. And he realized that he hadn't worked a minute and that this guy, Joe, was just giving him the money as a way to encourage him in writing this new story. I mean, that's arms open wide. Huge. And then when I got there and I was paying the lady and I counted it out, it turned out it was $120. And so I sent a text message to my friend Joe and I said, "Man, you gave me $120. So I put 100 on the guy on his phone, and I have this $20 I'll give back to you." And he said, "No." He said, "I want you to take that money and bless somebody else with it." And so all day, all afternoon, before I went to the shelter, I was praying about who I would bless. And that evening, God provided that person that I would share that $20 with. And actually then I took out my wallet and shared all I had, and I had $2. But that's all I had at that point. And that person that I blessed had $3, and that made $25 that they were going to bless another situation. And it was just absolutely beautiful. And then my friend worked 12 hours his first day, and he got paid at the end of it. And he was just like on cloud nine. He was just couldn't believe that this was happening. But that's how God works, brothers and sisters. That's the open arms of God at work. And then it gets even more beautiful because a friend of mine that I went to high school with in Easton in 1983, I graduated with her. She and her husband came down and served one night, and they got to meet this friend of mine in the 7 to 11 shift. Well, she saw my Facebook post about he needs some work clothes. He's working outside as a mason in the cold, and he needed some work clothes. So they drove from Easton to Salisbury, and they stopped in Cambridge at Walmart, and they bought $138 worth of new clothes, and they brought it to him in the shelter on Thursday night. Or Friday night. I think it was Friday night. I was bowled away. And when my friend came in and I took him in the back room and I showed him what they had gotten, the look on his face was unreal. But see, that's God. That's the way God works. God opens his arms wide to us. People who have disappointed God. people who have let God down, people who have gone far away from God. God opens his arms wide to us and says, it doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been. I want to be in relationship with you. I want to love you. So here at Community of Joy, because we believe God has open arms of welcome, forgiveness, grace, mercy, love, compassion, and non-judgment, we want to have open arms too. We see that demonstrated in so many ways in these past 2 weeks as a shelter. There it is right there on your screen. Next picture. I love it that even our children get in on it. Absolutely love it. Matt. Zach was enjoying playing chess. And so much so that he missed his baseball practice that night because he was playing chess with one of the masters. Open arms. That's what it is. You can go to the next slide. Brothers and sisters, we believe that God has open arms, and so should we. No questions asked, no judgments formed, just open arms of love and compassion. Now, there's another part to this story. It's not just the younger son, there's the older son. The older son, the older brother part of the story was, I think, Jesus' punchline in this story. It's Jesus saying to his critics, to the church, to the religious leaders, because they were focused on the wickedness of the sinners and tax collectors. And they were so focused on the sinners and outcasts, and they were struggling with the fact that they were finding a welcome into the fellowship with Jesus and God because they thought it was never possible for people who were sinners and outcasts to find that kind of fellowship with God. But here, Jesus is telling this story to communicate that God has open arms and wants to be in relationship with us. And he's bringing the older brother in because sometimes we're just like those religious leaders and Pharisees of the day. We're struggling with the fact that Jesus is showing his love and grace. He's opening arm, welcoming people who we have deemed not worthy of the love of God and the grace of God. The older brother in this story shows just as much or more disrespect for the father than the younger son. Yes, he's been there faithfully, and he says, I've been there faithfully. I've never let you down. I've been here all these years. But he's disrespecting his father when he lectures him in front of the guests. And he went so far as to say, here, I've been here all these years, and you didn't even kill a young goat for me. And then the older brother refuses to come into the party. He rejects the invitation of the father to come in. It wasn't because the father doesn't love him or didn't invite him in. He was welcome to come in. It's because the older brother has problems with the open arms of God, the open arms of the Father. The Father had open arms for him too. And that's what Jesus was trying to communicate to the religious leaders and Pharisees of that day, that God's arms were open to them too, and that they were welcome. But he didn't come into the party because he couldn't open his arms to the brother, to the younger brother. He couldn't open his arms. He couldn't respect the fact that his father had opened his arms, and he couldn't open his arms. It would be a shame, brothers and sisters, for us to miss out on the party because we couldn't open our arms to people that we deem notorious sinners and tax collectors. You see, God has open arms of welcome, of love, of compassion, of grace, of mercy, of forgiveness, of non-judgmentalism, and we are called to have those same open arms. No matter what you have done, no matter where you've been, you are never outside the reach of God's love. And to take his point to a deeper level, Jesus shows the Father marking the younger son as his. There's the robe. There's the ring that is the family signet on it. There's the sandals. And there's the fatted calf. The fatted calf was a rarity. They were saving that for the most special occasion. And when the father called for that fatted calf to be killed, to have it because his son had come back, that communicates in an outwardly way that demonstrates a love, a welcome, a compassion that was more than words. You know, it's one thing to say you love somebody. It's one thing for us as a church to say we love you, but it's an entirely different thing to demonstrate it. And that's the story that Jesus tells. It's a story about a God who demonstrates his love by opening wide his arms in acceptance and love and compassion for us, even those of us who have gone off to the far country and who have squandered all the resources that God has given us. And it's the way God wants us to be as well. So here at Community of Joy, at the core of joy is always Jesus and his open arms. Next week, we'll look at another one.